in Oregon and Washington for the past 20 years. I have a master's degree in tax law, which means I deal with complex business transactions, business formations, and complex estate planning. And more recently, been doing a lot more international business transactions. James was kind enough to allow me to speak to everyone regarding different business entity structures and how best to protect yourselves when you're running your business.
Thank you, Chris. And I think, if you want to go ahead and jump into your slide, I think we've got 3 minutes in here. Let's go ahead and let you start into the presentation.
All right. So again, good afternoon. Today's presentation is Scale Up Mastermind, a closer look at your legal structure and risk. Before we begin, of course, as an attorney, I have to do this. This is my disclaimer. The information provided during this presentation, either verbal or written, is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice on any subject matter and are for general informational purposes only. Furthermore, the information provided may not reflect the most up-to-date legal or other information. You should not act upon this information without consulting legal counsel. The views expressed during this presentation are solely those of Christopher T.L. Brown, me, in his individual capacity and not necessarily those of North Star Law Group PS. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on this presentation are hereby expressly disclaimed. So again, this is just for informational purposes. I'm not here to represent anybody. I'm not anybody's attorney. I'm just basically solely for informational purposes. So let's go ahead and get started.
And real quick, if you guys have a question or if you need a clarification, go ahead and type it into the chat box. And when there is a break, we'll be able to address those questions. There will be time at the end of the question or at the end of the presentation to address some specific issues as well.
And James, as I don't have access to the chat box, if you want to go ahead and read those questions when we do come to a break, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely, I plan to.
Okay, so today's presentation basically covers 3 business entities. There are actually a lot more not covered, which could be limited partnerships, general partnerships, joint ventures, business trusts, things like that. But those are kind of out there in the weeds. 99% of the clients that I deal with actually really talk about the 3 business entity types highlighted above. When we're talking about sole proprietorships, LLCs, what are known as limited liability companies, and corporations. To start off, the basic entity considerations when you're just starting a business, here are the things that you need to kind of consider. The first one is ease of use. How easy is the entity to use and operate? We kind of go, sole proprietorships are usually the easiest, then you go to limited liability companies, and then eventually go to corporations as far as just ease of use. How easy do you want to make it for yourself when you're operating these things? The second, which is basically the main topic of this conversation, is risk exposure and risk tolerance. We're talking about how risky is the industry the business operates in. If you're selling a product like maybe Mary Kay, there's not a whole lot of risk. But then if you're in a higher risk industry, like selling cannabis or marijuana, that's a very high risk industry. So you need to consider that when you're thinking about which entity structure to utilize. Then how much risk does the owner bring to the table? I mean, how much of their own liability and risk do they bring to the entity? I mean, if we have somebody that maybe has a low credit rating, that could be a high risk consideration. So we need to consider that as well. And then how risk adverse are the owners? Are they willing to take chances, or are they very, very conservative in their business operational views? So that's one of the main considerations as far as how we decide to go into a business entity structure. The third one, which is almost as important, is tax structure. Do the owners need flexibility in how they arrange their taxes? Flexibility could be a huge issue. Do the owners qualify as subchapter S corporation shareholders? And do the owners want self-employment tax savings? Now, my conversation with you today only talks about subchapter S corporations, and I need to kind of highlight what that means. A corporation, in and of itself, is a legal structure operated by, ruled by the state. So Washington State has its own rules on corporations. But then people start saying, well, I have a subchapter S corporation, or I have a subchapter C corporation. For Washington purposes, it doesn't matter. A corporation is a corporation is a corporation. But for tax purposes, for IRS purposes, there's a huge difference between a subchapter S corporation, which is generally for small businesses, and subchapter C corporations, which are for large corporations like Microsoft, Amazon, the big guys. So, but those are a tax distinction, not a legal distinction. So for purposes of our conversation today, I will only be talking about subchapter S corporations, small business corporations. There are some perks for subchapter C corporations, the big guys, but for really those, you really have to do a whole lot of tax analysis to see if you want to be one of those. But for most people, a subchapter S corporation is sufficient. And then the last consideration I like to think about and discuss with my clients is business marketing / branding. How do you want your business to be perceived by third parties, your customers, your clients, your vendors, your banks, your investors? How do you want your business to be perceived by them? And that could be a huge consideration going forward. So when I talk to my clients, when they come and say, I want to set up this type of business entity, these are really this is my checklist as far as what I go through when I talk with them about setting up some sort of business structure.